My name is Claire Whitaker. I'm 24 years old, and last Thanksgiving, my mother let her new boyfriend throw me out of the house before the turkey was even carved. Not after an argument in private. Not after some calm family discussion. Right there on Thanksgiving Day, with mashed potatoes still steaming on the counter, football playing in the living room, and my little sisters watching through the window like they were witnessing a car crash they couldn't stop. He said I didn't belong there anymore. He said he was the man of the house now, and I was just baggage from my mother's old life. Then he grabbed my bags, walked outside, and threw my clothes into the mud like he was taking out garbage. It had rained all night, so everything spilled open into wet leaves and dirty brown water. My jeans, my work shirts, the sweater I had saved for 2 paychecks to buy, all of it ruined in front of half the neighborhood. And then he said the one thing I will never forget. He said my father ran off because I was worthless, and now he finally understood why. I looked back at the porch, waiting for my mother to say one word. Just one. Stop. Don't talk to her like that. She's my daughter. Anything. But she only lit a cigarette and watched me stand there in the mud. My grandmother was there too. The same woman who raised me when my mother was too busy finding herself, and even she said nothing. That was the moment something inside me went completely quiet. I picked up my wet clothes, looked at my mother, and smiled. I told her I loved her, and I told her to remember that. Then I walked 3 miles to the bus station in the cold. 61 days later, my phone had 77 messages from her begging me to undo what I had done. She said they couldn't survive it. She said I was her daughter and I had to make it stop. But by then, she was learning exactly what happened when the person you threw away was the only person holding your life together. Before I tell you what I did after I walked out, tell me this. What time is it where you are right now, and where are you watching from? I want to know how far this Thanksgiving story travels before my mother finds out what everyone else thinks of what she did. I wish I could say that Thanksgiving was the first time my mother chose a man over me, but that would be a lie. The truth is, I learned very young that in my family, love usually came with conditions, and I was the child who was expected to understand things no child should ever have to understand. My grandmother, Evelyn Carter, raised me from the time I was 6 until I was 16 because my mother, Jennifer Whitaker, said she needed time to find herself. That was the phrase adults used when they wanted to make abandonment sound spiritual. Finding herself meant dating men who drove loud trucks, working jobs she quit whenever a manager annoyed her, disappearing for weekends, and calling once in a while to ask if I was being good. Evelyn lived in a small yellow house near the public elementary school in Millbrook, Ohio, and she was the one who packed my lunches, signed my permission slips, taught me how to save grocery coupons, and showed up when I had a fever. She was strict, but she was steady. And when you grow up with a mother who floats in and out of your life like bad weather, steady feels like love. When I was 16, my mother suddenly decided she was ready to be a real parent again. She showed up at Evelyn's house with a used SUV, red lipstick, and a speech about second chances. By then, my 2 little sisters, Grace and Bella, were already part of the picture. Grace was 7, serious and careful, the kind of kid who watched adults before deciding whether a room was safe. Bella was 5, sweet and loud, and always asking to sit in my lap even when she was too big for it. Different fathers, both gone, both turned into blurry names nobody talked about at dinner. I moved back in with my mother because everyone told me that was where I belonged, but within a month, I realized I had not been brought home to be a daughter. I had been brought home to be help. I made breakfast before school, walked the girls to the bus stop, packed their backpacks, helped with homework, and learned which teacher needed which form signed by Friday. My mother worked part-time at Dollar General, then at a gas station, then at a dollar store again, after she got fired from the gas station for missing shifts. Her schedule was always changing, and somehow that meant my life had to change around it. By 18, I was working at the local Walmart on weekends and taking online community college classes at night. Later, I got a job with Millbrook County Utilities as a customer service assistant, which is a very boring title for someone who mostly listened to people yell about late bills and broken meters. But it paid better, and I was good at it. I understood bills because I had been paying them since before I was old enough to rent a car. My mother's credit was a disaster. She had let electric, gas, water, and internet bills go into collections more than once, so when the house on Maple Ridge Lane needed accounts opened, I was the one who signed. Electric in my name, gas in my name, internet in my name, water tied to my payment card because the city would not trust her without a deposit she did not have. She was supposed to give me her share every month. Sometimes she did. Most of the time, she gave me excuses. I covered the rest because Grace and Bella needed heat in January, showers before school, and internet for homework. Then Todd Mercer walked into our lives like a bad decision wearing work boots. He was 41, unemployed more often than not, and called himself an auto mechanic, even though the only vehicle I ever saw him work on was his own rusted pickup. My mother met him at a bar outside town, and 2 weeks later he was sleeping on our couch. By week 3, his toothbrush was in the bathroom. By week 4, he was acting like the house had been waiting for him all along. He did not like me from the start. I was too quiet, too responsible, too present. He called me a freeloader even though I paid the bills he used. He told my mother I was too old to be living at home, even though I was the one making sure her daughters had clean clothes and school lunches. He hated that the internet password came from me. He hated that the power company spoke to me. He hated that when something broke, the girls came to me before they went to him. One night, after he had been drinking beer and watching football, he said, loud enough for everyone to hear, that a house needed a man in charge. I looked up from helping Bella with multiplication and told him a house needed someone who paid for it. My mother gasped like I had slapped him. Todd stared at me like he had just found the real problem. After that, the comments got sharper. He said I was baggage from my mother's old life. He said I made Jennifer feel guilty just by existing. He said if I respected my mother, I would move out and let her have a fresh start. What he meant was simple. He wanted me gone because I was the last person in that house he could not control. 6 weeks before Thanksgiving, I started preparing. I signed a lease on a tiny one-bedroom apartment across town, near the utility office and a bus line. I moved my birth certificate, my laptop, my bank papers, my good coat, and the few things that actually mattered to me. I left enough clothes in my room so nobody would notice. I did not tell my mother. I did not tell Evelyn. I did not even tell Grace and Bella because I knew they would cry, and if they cried, I might lose my nerve. I kept cooking, working, paying bills, smiling when I had to, and waiting for Todd to make his move. I knew he wanted me out. I just did not know he was cruel enough to turn Thanksgiving into the day he finally did it. Thanksgiving morning, I woke up at 5 because that was what I always did on holidays. My mother loved the idea of a traditional family dinner, but she never loved the work that made one happen. So I made the coffee, checked the turkey, peeled potatoes, mixed the green bean casserole, thawed the rolls, and set out the pumpkin pie Evelyn had brought the night before. Grace came into the kitchen wearing fuzzy socks and asked if she could help mash potatoes. Bella followed her 10 minutes later, still half asleep, dragging a blanket behind her like a cape. For a few hours, it almost felt normal. That was the cruel thing about families like mine. They could give you just enough warmth to make you forget the house was full of smoke. My mother came downstairs around 10, wearing jeans and a sweater, already irritated because Todd said the parade was annoying and he wanted football on. She told me the turkey smelled good, like she had not watched me do every single step. Todd sat in the living room with a beer before noon, boots on the coffee table, yelling at the TV like the players could hear him from Ohio. Evelyn arrived just before 1, carrying sweet potato casserole and the tight expression she wore whenever she saw Todd. She knew exactly what kind of man he was. She had said it to me in private more than once. But Evelyn had a rule that adults needed to make their own choices, which sounded wise until you watched those choices hurt children. By 2, the table was set. The girls were excited, and I was trying hard to get through the day without giving Todd the fight he obviously wanted. He started small. He said maybe next year there would be more room at the table. He said adult children needed to learn independence. He said some people were too comfortable living off their mothers. I kept carving turkey. My mother looked down at her plate. Evelyn pressed her lips together but said nothing. Grace and Bella went quiet because kids always know when a room is becoming unsafe. Then Todd pushed his chair back and said he and my mother had been talking. He said it was time for me to leave, not after the holidays, not after I found a place. That day, Thanksgiving Day, I looked at my mother and waited for her to correct him. She did not. She reached for her cigarettes even though she had promised the girls she would not smoke in the house on holidays. I asked her if that was what she wanted. She looked at Todd first, then at me, and said, maybe he had a point. I remember the sound of the refrigerator humming. I remember Bella's fork slipping out of her hand. I remember Grace whispering my name like she was trying to pull me back from a ledge. Todd smiled because he knew he had won. He stood up and said this was his house now, and I had overstayed my welcome. I told him his name was not on the lease, not on the utilities, and not on a single bill that kept that house running. That was when his face changed. Men like Todd can insult you all day, but the second you tell the truth in front of witnesses, they become dangerous. He walked down the hall to my room, grabbed 2 garbage bags of clothes I had left there, and dragged them through the living room. I followed him because I already knew where this was going. He kicked open the back door and threw the bags into the yard. It had rained all night, and the ground was soft, muddy, and covered in dead leaves. My clothes spilled open into it. Work shirts, jeans, socks, the blue sweater Grace had helped me pick out at Walmart. Bella started crying behind the glass door. Grace wrapped her arms around her, but she was crying too. Todd went back inside, grabbed the last bag, and threw it even farther. Then he turned around with that ugly little grin and said my father had run off because I was worthless, and now he understood why. There are insults that hurt because they are true, and there are insults that hurt because someone found the oldest wound and stepped on it. That one did both. I looked at my mother. She stood on the porch, cigarette between her fingers, smoke curling around her face. She did not look angry. She did not look shocked. She looked tired, like defending me would be too much effort. Evelyn stood behind her with her arms folded, eyes hard, mouth closed. Across the street, Mrs. Linda Parker moved her curtains just enough for me to see her watching. In a town like Millbrook, people did not need social media. They had windows. By morning, everyone would know that Jennifer Whitaker's oldest daughter got thrown out on Thanksgiving while the little girls cried. Todd told me to get moving before he called the cops. I wanted to scream that he had no right. I wanted to remind my mother of every bill I had paid, every fever I had sat through, every school morning I had saved because she was too tired or too hungover or too distracted. But something in me went still, not calm, not peaceful, still, like a door closing. I picked up the bags, wet mud soaking through my sleeves, and looked at my mother. I smiled because I wanted her to remember my face exactly like that. Not broken, not begging, just done. I said, I love you. Remember that. She flinched, but she did not answer. Todd laughed like he thought he had won. Then I walked down Maple Ridge Lane with 3 muddy bags and no ride. My car was at a coworker's place because the alternator was being replaced, so I walked. 3 miles to the bus station in cold November wind, past houses glowing with Thanksgiving dinners, past families who had no idea the girl outside carrying garbage bags had just been erased from her own family. I did not cry until I reached the bus shelter. Even then, it was only for a minute. Then I wiped my face, pulled out my phone, and checked the address of the apartment I had already rented. They thought they had thrown me into the street. What they had really done was release me from the last reason I had to keep saving them. My apartment was small, plain, and smelled like fresh paint and old carpet. But when I unlocked the door that night, it felt like the safest place I had ever been. There was no yelling, no beer cans on the coffee table, no Todd telling me where I could stand in a house I paid to keep warm. I dropped the muddy bags in the bathtub, sat on the kitchen floor, and ordered the cheapest pizza I could find because I had cooked Thanksgiving dinner all morning and never got to eat a bite of it. I remember sitting there under one yellow ceiling light, eating from the box, making a list on my phone. Not a revenge list. At least, that was not what I called it then. It was a responsibility list. Change mailing address. Move payroll paperwork. Replace work shirts. Buy towels. Update bank address. Transfer utilities. That last one mattered most. The next morning was Black Friday, and while half of Millbrook was standing in line for discounted TVs and air fryers, I was on the phone with utility companies. Electric first, gas second, internet after that. Then the city water office on Monday because government offices do not care about your family trauma. Every account was in my name. Every payment history belonged to me. Every customer service rep spoke to me like I was doing the most normal thing in the world, because I was. I had moved. I was transferring my services to my new address and ending responsibility for the old one. I followed every rule. I paid the final balance. I gave proper notice. I did not lie. I did not threaten. I did not sabotage anything. The old house still had a little time because of billing cycles, holiday delays, and city processing dates. That was fine with me. I did not need them to suffer overnight. I just needed my name off a house where I had been told I did not belong. For the first week, nobody called. I think my mother assumed I was staying with a friend and would come crawling back once I cooled down. Todd probably told her I would. Men like him think everyone else is as dependent as they are. Grace texted me from her school tablet 2 days after Thanksgiving and asked if I was mad at her. That broke my heart worse than anything Todd said. I told her no, never, not for 1 second. Bella sent me a voice message saying she missed me and that Thanksgiving was bad now. I listened to it 4 times and cried in my laundry room so my neighbors would not hear. Christmas came quietly. I bought a tiny tabletop tree from Walmart, the kind with lights already attached, and put it near my window. Grace sent me a picture of her and Bella in matching pajamas in front of my mother's old tree. They were smiling, but their eyes looked tired. I wanted to go get them right then. I wanted to knock on the door, push past Todd, and bring them to my apartment. But wanting to save children and having the legal right to do it are 2 different things. So I worked. I took extra shifts at Millbrook County Utilities. I answered angry customer calls during winter storms. I saved every dollar I could. I bought a second-hand couch, a microwave, 2 lamps, and a set of dishes on clearance. My life became quiet and organized in a way I had never known. Then, 61 days after Thanksgiving, my phone started buzzing before 7 in the morning. First 1 call from my mother, then 3 more, then Todd, then my mother again. I let them ring. The messages came next. At first they were confused. Why is the power off? Did you get a notice? Who do we call? Then they became angry. What did you do? This is not funny. The girls have school. The internet is out. The heat is not working. By noon, they were panicked. My mother sent message after message saying the utility company told her the account holder had ended service at that address. She said they would not reconnect without new deposits. She said her credit was flagged. She said Todd had tried, but they wanted money he did not have. Then came the message I remember word for word. How did you do this? Undo it. Please. We cannot survive this. Whatever you did, stop it now. I am your mother. Please make it end. I stared at that message for a long time. Not because I felt guilty, because for the first time she was admitting the truth without meaning to. She had not needed me as a daughter. She had needed me as electricity, gas, water, internet, childcare, grocery money, emotional support, and a human shield between her bad choices and their consequences. I did not answer. Later that night, Evelyn called. Her voice was sharp. She said my mother and the girls were at her house because the old place had no heat. She asked me what kind of person lets children sit in the cold. I said the kind of person who was thrown out by their mother's boyfriend on Thanksgiving, and then legally moved her own accounts to her own apartment. Evelyn told me I was being cruel. I asked her where that concern was when Bella and Grace watched Todd throw my clothes into the mud. She went silent, then said this was different. I said no, it was not different. It was just finally inconvenient for the people who stayed quiet. After I hung up, I blocked Todd. Then my mother. Then, for a few days, Evelyn too. I know some people would say that was harsh. Maybe it was. But peace feels harsh to people who are used to using you. I slept 8 hours that night for the first time in years. 3 days later, my mother and Todd found my apartment. I was getting ready for work when someone started pounding on my door hard enough to make the frame shake. I looked through the peephole and saw my mother standing there in the same winter coat she had worn on Thanksgiving. Todd stood behind her with his arms crossed, jaw tight, trying to look like a man who had a plan. I opened the door but left the chain on. My mother started talking before I said a word. She said the girls were scared, that Evelyn's house was too small, that the utility companies were being impossible, that I needed to call and explain there had been a misunderstanding. I told her there had been no misunderstanding. I moved the services that were in my name. Todd stepped closer and told me to stop playing games. He said a real family did not do this to each other. I almost laughed. A real family. That was funny coming from the man who threw my belongings into mud and called me worthless in front of 2 children. I told him he was free to open accounts himself. He said they wanted deposits. I said then he should pay them. My mother looked down. Todd said money was tight. I asked if money had been tight when he bought beer every weekend and filled his truck with gas to drive around feeling important. He called me a selfish little brat. I closed the door while he was still talking. They stayed outside for 10 minutes, knocking, pleading, then yelling. My neighbor across the hall opened her door just enough to listen. Small towns and apartment buildings have the same heartbeat. Everyone hears everything. That night, I found a note taped to my door in my mother's handwriting asking me to meet her at Betty's Corner Diner on Saturday. Just her, she wrote. No Todd. I should have ignored it, but there was still a part of me that remembered being a little girl waiting for my mother to choose me. So I went. Betty's was the kind of diner every Ohio town has, with red booths, coffee that never tasted fresh but always tasted familiar, and waitresses who called everyone honey. My mother was already in a corner booth when I arrived. She looked smaller than I remembered. No makeup, hair tied back, hands shaking around a coffee mug. For a second, I felt sorry for her. Then she opened her mouth and reminded me why pity is not the same as trust. She said she was sorry things got out of hand. She said Todd had been stressed. She said he drank too much sometimes and said things he did not mean. She said she should have spoken up, but everything happened so fast. I let her talk. I listened to every excuse, every soft little sentence designed to make the truth less ugly. Then I asked one question. Are you leaving him? She blinked like I had asked something unfair. She said it was complicated. She said Todd had nowhere to go. She said he loved her in his own way. She said he felt terrible, but he had pride and did not apologize easily. That was when I stopped feeling sorry for her. She did not come to apologize. She came to recruit me back into the job I had quit. She wanted the bills fixed, the heat restored, the children protected, and Todd kept comfortable. She wanted me to rescue the house without making anyone accountable for why it was burning down. I told her I would not put my name back on anything connected to Todd. She grabbed my hand across the table and whispered that Grace and Bella needed me. I pulled my hand away because she was right, and that was exactly why it hurt. They did need me. But needing me did not give my mother the right to keep feeding them into chaos and expecting me to clean up the damage. I paid for my coffee and left. After that, Evelyn called again. She said, my mother, Todd, and the girls were sleeping at her place, and she was too old for this kind of stress. She said I had made my point and needed to fix things before the girls were harmed. I told her the girls were already harmed. They were harmed when adults taught them that a man could humiliate their sister and everyone would pretend it was normal. Evelyn snapped that I did not understand how hard motherhood had been for Jennifer. I said I understood exactly how hard motherhood had been for me, and I was not even their mother. That shut her up for a moment. But Evelyn was stubborn. She said family means stepping up even when people make mistakes. I said family also means speaking up when someone is being abused in front of you. She hung up. For 2 weeks, my mother, Todd, Grace, and Bella stayed at Evelyn's house. I heard pieces of what happened through town gossip and one message from Grace that just said Grandma and Todd yell a lot. Todd did not get a job. He did not save money. He did not find an apartment. He smoked on Evelyn's porch, drank in her kitchen, and complained that everyone was against him. Finally, Evelyn reached her limit. She told them they had until the end of the month to leave. My mother called me crying, saying Evelyn was throwing them out. I asked what Todd's plan was. She said he was trying. That word had become her religion. Todd was always trying, never doing. When the deadline came, Evelyn changed the locks while they were at the grocery store. She left their bags on the porch and a note saying she was done. The woman who once told me silence was not her place had finally found a boundary when Todd started making her life uncomfortable. By then, it was February in Ohio, and my mother had nowhere to go except the passenger seat of Todd's pickup. I found out they were living in the pickup from Mrs. Linda Parker because of course I did. I ran into her at the grocery store near Route 9 while I was buying soup, bread, and the cheap coffee I kept pretending I liked. She touched my arm in the produce section and said she had heard about my poor mother. In Millbrook, that sentence never meant anything good. I tried to be polite and leave, but she kept talking. She said Todd's pickup had been parked near the old house several times that week. She said my mother and the girls were inside for hours. She said the girls were doing homework in the back seat with blankets over the windows. She lowered her voice when she said someone had called for a welfare check because it was too cold for children to be sleeping in a vehicle. I stood there holding a bag of apples, feeling like my ribs had tightened around my lungs. I drove past Maple Ridge Lane on my way home. I told myself not to, but I did it anyway. Todd's pickup was parked 2 houses down from where we used to live. The windows were fogged. A blanket covered the back window. I could see movement inside. Small shapes. One of them probably Bella because she always moved her hands when she talked. I kept driving because if I stopped, I did not know what I would do. That night, my mother called from a number I did not recognize. This time, I answered. She sounded panicked in a way I had never heard before. Not dramatic. Not manipulative. Truly scared. She said a CPS worker had come after the welfare check. Her name was Angela Reed, and she told my mother that 2 children could not live in a vehicle in February and still be considered safe. My mother had 7 days to prove stable housing or the girls would be removed into emergency care. 7 days. After years of making everyone else absorb her consequences, my mother had finally hit a wall that would not move for tears. I asked where Todd was. She said he was in the truck with the girls, giving her privacy to make calls. I asked what his plan was. Silence. Then she said he was trying to line up work. I asked if she had considered leaving him. More silence. Then she said Todd had nowhere to go, and she could not abandon him. I looked around my warm apartment, at the lamp I bought secondhand, at the bills I paid myself, at the quiet I had earned, and I realized she was still choosing him. Even with her daughters 1 week away from foster care, she was still trying to save Todd from the consequences of being Todd. The next morning, I called her back and made one offer. I told her I would help co-sign a small rental for her and the girls. I would help with utility deposits. I would even help Grace and Bella move their school things. But Todd could not live there. Todd could not be on the lease, could not have a key, could not be part of the arrangement. She had to choose, not between Todd and me, between Todd and her children. She cried and said I was making it impossible. I said no, Todd had made it impossible. I was making it clear. 3 hours later, Todd called me. I should not have answered, but anger makes you curious. He told me to meet him in the Walmart parking lot because we needed to talk like adults. I went because Walmart had cameras, people, and security. And because part of me wanted to look him in the face when he realized I was not afraid of him anymore. He was leaning against his pickup near the far edge of the lot, wearing the same gray hoodie I had seen him wear for weeks. He looked rough, unshaved, red-eyed, but still proud in that useless way some men are proud even when they have failed at everything. He said I had turned my mother against him. I told him my mother was still with him, so clearly I had not done a very good job. He said I was using money to control everyone. I said no, I had stopped letting everyone control me through money. That made him angry. He said my mother had warned him about me, that I had always been difficult, always needed attention, always tried to run the house even as a kid. He said that was why she sent me to Evelyn, not because she was irresponsible, not because she wanted freedom, but because I had been too much to handle. For a second I could not speak. I was 6 years old when she left me. 6. And somehow, in the story she told Todd, I was the problem. He kept talking, saying my mother would be happier if I stopped judging her, stopped interfering, stopped acting like I was better than everyone else. Then he stepped closer and grabbed my wrist. Not hard enough to leave a bruise, but hard enough to remind me what kind of man he wanted to be. I looked down at his hand, then up at the cameras on the light pole, and told him if he did not let go, I would scream loud enough for every shopper in Ohio to hear. He let go and called me dramatic. A Walmart employee pushing carts had stopped and was watching us. I got in my car and left while Todd yelled that I would lose my sisters forever. The next day, Ms. Angela Reed from CPS called me directly. She said my name was listed as the emergency contact at the girls' school. She asked if I would be willing to discuss temporary kinship placement if my mother failed to secure housing by the deadline. I met her at a coffee shop after work. She was direct, professional, and tired in the way people get when they have seen too many children pay for adult selfishness. She explained that if I passed a background check and home visit, Grace and Bella could stay with me instead of going into foster care. My apartment was small, but for an emergency, it could work. I drove around for hours after that meeting. I thought about my quiet life, my money, my sleep, my freedom. Then I thought about Grace doing math homework in a truck, and Bella asking if I was mad at her. By morning, I had my answer. I called Ms. Reed and said yes. On the 7th day, I arrived at the county social services office. My mother was in the waiting room with Grace and Bella. The girls had backpacks and pale faces. My mother looked destroyed, but I could not let that move me too much, because pity had nearly ruined me before. Ms. Reed had me sign paperwork and explain the next steps. Grace ran into my arms first. Bella followed and buried her face in my coat. I told them they were safe. When we walked outside, Todd was in the parking lot, smoking beside his pickup like a villain too predictable to be interesting. He shouted that I had stolen his family. Ms. Reed told him to leave the property. He ignored her and came toward my car. Security arrived first, then a local officer who had clearly dealt with Todd before. Todd kept yelling until the officer told him he could either leave or be cited for disorderly conduct and interfering with a child welfare matter. For once, Todd chose the smartest option available to him. He left. The girls sat in my back seat holding hands the whole drive home. Bella finally whispered, "Is he coming too?" I said no. She closed her eyes and nodded like that was the first good news she had heard in months. The first night Grace and Bella slept in my apartment, I did not sleep at all. I lay on the couch listening to every sound they made, every turn, every breath, every little nightmare noise that came from the bedroom. I had given them my bed and made myself a nest of blankets in the living room. Bella woke up twice crying, and both times Grace climbed in beside her before I even reached the door. That was when I understood how much they had been parenting each other while the adults around them fell apart. Over the next few weeks, everything changed. My quiet apartment became crowded with school papers, cereal bowls, damp mittens, toothpaste on the sink, and little shoes by the door. I moved into a 2-bedroom place closer to their new public school because Ms. Reed said it would help the court see stability. The rent hurt. The deposit nearly emptied my savings. I took extra shifts and learned how to stretch chicken, rice, pasta, and canned soup into meals that felt like dinner. I signed forms, met teachers, scheduled counseling, and sat through meetings where people used words like trauma, adjustment, and temporary guardianship. Like those words could ever explain what it feels like to become a parent overnight at 24. Grace tried to act fine. She made her bed perfectly, answered adults politely, and kept asking if she was being helpful. Bella was different. She cried when doors closed too loudly. She hid snacks in her backpack. She asked every night if the heat would stay on. Every time she asked, I told her yes. The heat would stay on. The lights would stay on. The door would stay locked. Nobody was coming in unless we let them. Meanwhile, Todd finally met consequences he could not talk his way around. About a month after the girls came to me, I got a call from Ms. Reed letting me know there had been an incident. Todd had been arrested for DUI after a state trooper pulled him over outside town. He was driving the pickup with expired tags, open beer cans in the cab, and a suspended license. When they ran his name, they found an old warrant tied to unpaid child support from a previous marriage he had never mentioned. That part almost made me laugh, not because it was funny, but because it was perfect. The man who called himself the man of the house could not even take care of the children he already had. 6 months in county jail was what he got after everything was added up. 6 months away from my mother, away from my sisters, away from every woman and child he had been using as cover for his failures. My mother did not handle it well. At the first family court hearing, she cried and said she had lost everything. The judge did not look impressed. Temporary custody stayed with me. My mother was ordered to complete parenting classes, alcohol counseling, and supervised visitation. She had to show stable housing, steady income, and proof that Todd would not be around the girls. When she heard that, she started to argue that Todd was misunderstood. The judge stopped her and said her priorities were exactly why the court was concerned. I watched her face crumble, and for the first time, I did not rush to comfort her. That might sound cold, but there is a difference between compassion and volunteering to drown with someone who keeps jumping into the water. Evelyn called me after the hearing. I almost did not answer. When I did, Her voice sounded smaller than I had ever heard it. She said she had been wrong. She said she thought staying silent on Thanksgiving meant staying neutral. Then she said very quietly that silence had not been neutral at all. It had helped Todd. I did not know what to say. Part of me wanted to forgive her right there because I missed the grandmother who raised me. Another part of me remembered standing in the mud, waiting for her to be brave, and watching her choose comfort instead. So I told her I heard her, but I was not ready. She said she understood. Maybe that was the beginning of something healing. Maybe it was just another apology arriving too late. I do not know yet. What I do know is that Grace got an A on her spelling test last week, and Bella slept through the night for the first time without waking up scared. I know our apartment is not fancy, but it is warm. I know there are groceries in the fridge, clean towels in the bathroom, and a school calendar on the wall. I know the girls laugh more now. Not all the time. Not like nothing happened, but enough to remind me that children can heal when the adults around them finally stop making excuses. My mother gets supervised visits twice a month. Sometimes the girls want to go. Sometimes they do not. I let Ms. Reed and the counselor guide that because I refuse to use them as weapons, even against someone who hurt me. That is one lesson I want them to learn from all of this. Love is not control. Love is not guilt. Love is not making a child responsible for an adult's choices. Sometimes love means showing up. Sometimes it means walking away. And sometimes it means drawing a line so the next generation does not grow up thinking pain is just another family tradition. People ask if I regret what I did with the utilities. I do not. I did not cut them off to be cruel. I stopped paying for a house I had been thrown out of. I stopped holding up a life where I was insulted, used, and erased. Todd paid for his choices. My mother is paying for hers. Evelyn is living with hers. And me? I am living with mine. I chose my sisters. I chose my self-respect. I chose to stop being the emergency fund, the backup parent, the silent fixer, and the daughter everyone could hurt because they assumed I would always come back. On Thanksgiving, my mother watched me walk away in the mud. 61 days later, she begged me to save her from the life she chose. But the truth is, I did save someone. I saved Grace. I saved Bella. And maybe, in a way, I am still learning to understand. I saved myself too. So tell me honestly, if you were standing where I stood, would you keep rescuing the people who kept hurting you? Or would you finally protect the innocent ones who never had a choice?